Hi, and welcome to the show. I am so excited that this week I am interviewing the amazing EJ Love, who is a self-love, intimacy, and relationship coach and the best-selling author of Become the One, which she will tell us all about, and you guys need to go and get, and it's all linked in the bio. You know the deal. But can you please just join me in really sending a lot of love to this lady, because she does a lot of powerful, good things in the world. And thank you, EJ, for being on the show today.
Oh, thanks for having me, Marina. It's beautiful to be here.
Yeah, it really is. EJ and I have kind of been in similar circles, and we cross over a lot. And one thing I know is very true of you, and the way people speak of you is just with such affection, which, maybe sometimes we don't know how people speak of us to other people. But even though you and I have not spent a lot of time personally together, I actually just feel this massive affinity for you, like a soul sister, because of the deep degree of affection and respect that people reference you with. Now, I'm also really excited because you have very interesting stories to share, and I am someone who loves an interesting story that is also backed up by someone incredibly gifted. So I'm so excited today to get into what we get to get into, but I'm going to start with some off-the-wall, not related questions that I always ask my guests. The first one is, which animal of all the animals best represents your personality and why?
Oh, that's a great question. So, I mean, I resonate to two different animals, and I'm gonna just have two because I'm choosing to have two.
Because you're a woman and you get to have it all, baby. Yep.
And the reason for this is because it's definitely two parts to me, and they're two of the animals that I really have connected with strongly. Today I brought two pictures of these animals. And so one is the dolphin, and the dolphin is, first of all, the only other mammal that mates for pleasure. So being a sex really resonate to pleasure and the importance of that. And also play has been something that's actually been shut down in me, and something that I'm consciously working on, continually to live into that dolphin playfulness. So that's that reason. And then the panda, I love panda, a nickname I get called by my partner, is really about the balance of the masculine and feminine. And really, I teach a lot about the masculine and feminine, and a lot of my journey and my path is about being, having that integration of the masculine and feminine.
Oh, I love that. And it's so funny. And now I know why I've been so excited to talk to you and our alignment, because equally my journey has been so much about the masculine and feminine and the gypsy goddess queen concept that I teach women. The two pillars of, the gypsy pillar is play and the goddess pillar is pleasure. So yes. Amen. Okay. And if you could have a superpower, any power on the planet, what would you choose to click your fingers and suddenly possess the superpower of?
The first thing that came to my mind was invisibility, and I have no idea why.
Well, let's just lock it in. That'd be a cool skill gift.
I was like, oh, I want to fly. So I'm going to be one of those superheroes that can change into different things. Because then if I want to be invisible, or if I want to fly, so the superhero that can become any of the superheroes.
EJ, you are like my soul sister right there, because you know what I'm already getting from you with the two animals, and I'm actually going to have the superpower that lets me have any superpower, is that I can see right now you are a stand for women having it all, or for humans having it all. And I'm just so on board with that message. So let's dive straight in. Your story is fascinating. I know you have released just this year a best-selling, internationally best-selling book called Become the One. Can you tell us a little bit about the journey that led to that book, and you as a whole, and who you be in the world, and why this work is so important to you?
Yeah, so Become the One was probably, I say, 3 years in the making of writing it, but it was probably a lifetime of and healing and growing. And it really is a story of my journey in relating. And I've had a history of narcissistic abuse in particular, and codependency. And I know so many people resonate to that. And this book was written in mind for women, although it also resonates with a lot of men out there. And I speak to that in the book. And to really understand why we attract these relationships. So my experience was attracting men that were narcissistic or unavailable, where I wouldn't feel wanted or chosen, or would end up feeling abandoned and rejected. And I led a pretty wild life at times, as I know so many of us have, and numbed a lot of my life and just shut my emotions down. And it is also about, going through my spiritual awakening and being with the person I thought was my twin flame and my soulmate. And I had about, quite a few of them. And it was like just really looking at the journey of the deep healing that I had to do to essentially realize that I'm my soulmate and the person that I'm looking for was me. And when I can bring that all back to myself instead of the conditioning that my soulmate is outside of me, that's when I can actually have healthy relationships. So I really am quite raw and honest and vulnerable in the book. I don't hold anything back. I talk about some crazy things that I did, even and when being in an abusive relationship, some of the things I acted totally out of character. And a lot of the women I speak to will be like, maybe I'm the crazy one. Am I the crazy one? And at a voice. And this is how I was manipulated and doing all these things and believing that there was something seriously wrong and broken about me. And that, even that I was so in the wrong. So, so it's about that journey and giving a voice to anyone that's been abused, because so many people that have been through abuse don't feel safe to talk about it, or don't feel like they have a voice. Have been so shut down and don't feel safe to even be vulnerable. So I feel like when I share my story, I have so many people go, oh my God, it was like you were in my head. It's like you were about me. I'm not alone. And so I think, having a real raw account of that, and then the step-by-step journey with all the processes and exercises and practices through it is like, I wanted to be able to take this, like someone's either been in an unhealthy codependent relationship in the past and want to be able to have a healthy relationship or want to improve the current relationship, or they're coming out of it and they want like a guide and they're like, okay, well, what do I do so I don't attract this again? And so it's there and they don't have to think about how am I going to afford a coach, or how am I going to, like, so a lot of people might not be financially able to, especially if they've been dependent on the person they've been in a relationship financially. They might not have those funds. So many people would come to me and I'd be like, oh, I wish I had I wish there was what was in my head and what I'd experienced was in a book. Like I could just hand it to you and be like, here, to read the book. So that's a big part of the reason why I wrote it.
That's beautiful. And I think that is the point of books, right? And when you said before about sharing your story, I think that is the medicine all of us need to remember about our stories, is that when we share them, we give people permission to own their stories and to realize that there's no shame. There need not be shame associated with that. So a couple of things I wanted to just unpack from what you shared. What classifies a partner, or narcissism is something I'd really love you to just unpack briefly. I know we could talk for a day on that. I understand that. I know it's a deep rabbit's hole, but just for the people listening, if they're like, well, is a narcissist just someone who's like self-centered? Can you just unpack that? And then also codependency. Can you just unpack that really briefly so that our listeners have, I suppose, a framework so that as we go deeper, they know what we're referencing?
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, so there's definitely a lot of conception about what a narcissist is and what narcissism is. And so narcissism is a spectrum, and to a degree everyone has narcissistic traits, and there's people that are high on the spectrum that have a actual personality disorder, and then there's everywhere in between. So for someone that's high on the spectrum, essentially what's happened is there's been a trauma in childhood that's been so great and so painful that they create a false mask. And this false mask needs to get what's called supply to live, to know that it's safe. And so how they get supply is by from other people. Yeah, and they need to manipulate those other people and hurt those other people and damage those other people to get their needs met, and go about it in really toxic ways. And so the people that will they'll take advantage of the vulnerable people. You know, often they talk about people that are empaths, codependents, which I'll talk to in a minute, who couldn't even believe that someone would be like that. And that was in my experience. I was like, what do you mean? Like, you can't, someone not having empathy? Like, it's so foreign for me. So there's been studies done that talk about that the people that have narcissistic personality disorder, which is actually really hard to diagnose because someone who has a disorder will usually not go and get diagnosed, that the part of the brain that has empathy has not been developed. So when my ex-partner was doing some of the things he was doing to me, I was like, I couldn't understand, or like it just didn't register for me as to how someone could be like this. Like, it was so foreign. And then when I started looking into narcissism, I was like, wow, this explains so much. And it gave me understanding as to what was going on. And knowing that I wasn't crazy, which was good, which was a relief. But realizing there's like a lot of people out there that have a high on the spectrum of narcissism. And they're out there, and there's like even in spiritual communities and personal development, they're out there on different spectrums, and there's different types of narcissists. So I've experienced different types. I speak to that in the book. So there's like a covert narcissist, an exhibitionist narcissist, a toxic narcissist. And the last one that I experienced was covert, which I feel is like the worst because it's so covert that you can't see it. Really, he was really spiritual, but behind closed doors was a completely different person. And it was so hard in my brain, it was very hard to understand what was going on. So that's, I could obviously go into a lot more, but it is in my book. I do go into quite a lot of depth in the book, and I had a lot of great feedback about helping people understand it in this book without, because sometimes people can get a bit obsessive about understanding narcissism when really actually it's not about using the mind to understand, just going into the body to heal what's attracted to narcissism in the first place, and that's codependency. Yeah, so essentially, someone that's codependent will be outsourcing the love and approval to other people, and the narcissist is like, I'm going to give you all the love and approval that you've been seeking that you didn't get, and I'm going to give that to you, but that's only just to hook you in. And so the codependent is like, if I show up in this way, or if I'm like the rescuer or the people pleaser or the good girl, as long as I show up in these ways, then I'll be. And so narcissists has a victim role, and so the victim and the rescuer really play out in this relationship, what I call a role mate or a wound mate relationship.
Yes.
And so the codependent is needing someone else's love and approval to essentially feel like they're loved. So so there's a lot of different ways that you could explain that, but if anyone wants to know more, I'd definitely read the book.
Yes. So codependency, though, you could simply say that you're seeking to be dependent on someone else as opposed to self-reliant or self-fulfilled. Is it in a simple frame?
Yeah. And there's another name called self-love deficit disorder. Is another.
Whoa.
Yeah. So so I always thought that it's so funny when I started learning about codependency that it was about someone relying on drugs, and I was like, I've been with heaps of codependents. And that they're dependent on drugs, and I was like, oh no, it's me, I'm the codependent. Wow. Because when a person would maybe not meet my needs, I'd feel rejected or abandoned, and I'd be scrambling to try and prove myself to that person and act in these ways, going outside of myself to get that love.
Yeah. It's interesting listening to you. I'm actually even feeling, EJ, if codependency isn't also, everybody has it and there's a spectrum, because I teach from the space of self-sovereignty and helping women, really much like all of us, when we realize everything is within us and everything we need and want is within us, right? From that place, we come out whole and we can be of service without the depletion and that transfer of power that often happens in that narcissistic codependent relationship. But I'm wondering, with the codependency, if lots of people who might not associate as codependency yet are seeking the external approval of people on social media, or are just subtly people pleasing in their family. Like, it's important with these labels. And sometimes I'm totally, not for labels. I'm like, they don't help. And yet if we let the labels just kind of be there and realize that on some level, we're all a piece of that as well, then we get to play with what's relevant to me and what's really effective for me to have more of, the life I want to have and be the person I want to have, right? And I think I love that you broke down narcissism so clearly in your book. I just think that's brilliant, because I think people can get really lost once they're like, oh, I was with a narcissist. Then it can, it's like they crack the wound open, and instead of really healing it, they live in the wound. Do you see that a lot? Like, wow, and it becomes almost a battle they need to wage, as opposed to just, how do I put my life back together and move forward without repeating? Because I don't know about you, but I know in my work, the repeating of the pattern is the most common way that we keep fulfilling these relationship wounds.
Yeah, so essentially, yes, we're all codependent to a degree. And I think it's like, let's not make that wrong. Like, I think there's this stigma around codependency that is wrong and it's bad, and it's so we're conditioned to be codependent because if we're brought up and we're reliant on our parents to survive. We're reliant on having to show up and please our parents, or be the good little boy or girl, in these play these different roles out within our family. And as long as I play that role, therefore I'm going to get loved, is the condition. And we spend our whole lives on essentially. But it's like when we can accept it and have awareness of it, and then we can make a different choice. And we can say, well, is this serving me? How it's serving me? But you're right, we can rely on our phone. We can be codependent with our work colleagues, with our phone, with our laptop, right? Yeah.
So anything we're giving our power to and equally seeking power from. So I'm curious then, say for instance, narcissism being the label, or codependency, if we just were to sort of categorize that as maybe an unhealthy or, not effective relationship, maybe just give it a different title. What do you think for people listening? Because I agree with you. I only very recently, in my adulthood, experienced a relationship that for the first time, I work in family systems. Family constellations is a big part of the work I do. So I'm clear that a lot of our relationships are pre-programmed patterns on repeat, and they're wounds of sorts, but they're not always terrible. Does that make sense? Like, even my first marriage was 17 years, and I definitely married in alignment with the pre-programming of my family system. And yet that's a very healthy relationship. We've separated and we have 2 beautiful children, and it's all good. But very recently, I did have an interaction, and it surprised me with a narcissist. And I put my hand on my heart, and I will honestly say I completely lost my identity for a period there. And it actually shocked me, and it shocked people around me, because anyone who knows me knows how generally one of the things I've been since I can remember is self-assured, self-knowing, self-aware. And it really put a tailspin on me, but it was a great gift, because it was the last piece in my deep understanding of certain things, right? Everything happens for a reason. But what I would love from your depth in this area is, what is like a telltale sign? When you kind of know, I don't know if this is right, and yet so much of it's so amazing. It's the best thing I've ever had. It's all I've ever wanted. What's the telltale sign for someone listening that's like, you know what? I'm just going to put this in your ear so you can't unhear it, that maybe this is something to watch out for.
Oh, there's so many things, so it's hard to pinpoint one. The first thing I want to say is following intuition is huge. You have a voice in the back that's saying that something's not right. The second thing is the boundaries. Is like, generally a narcissist won't respect boundaries. What I did with I have a beautiful, healthy partner now, and I remember, like, when we first started dating, I took things really slowly, and I would ask him questions to make sure that he was self-responsible. and that he had healthy boundaries. So self-responsibility is huge. And it also, again, it is different. Narcissists can have different like red flags. Like, I think one of the biggest things is how they speak about their ex-partners as well. That's one of the biggest things, is like and this is just for me, like it's like a non-negotiable, like to make sure that person has actually done some healing around their partner, so they're not in the victimization of they did this to me and la la la. So it's I remember with the covert narcissist, he was like, my ex is a psycho, she's crazy, she's a liar. And I was like, oh, okay, like, and I felt sorry for him. I was like, oh, like, I'm gonna show you that women aren't really like that. I'm gonna show you honest, and I'm gonna prove to you that women are great. Yeah, I'm not like her.
I think that is such a hot tip. And for anyone listening, that when you just said that, if you're not watching this on YouTube, the video, I'm like sitting here with my hands. I'm such a physical mover that I'm like, yes, 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 with my hands. And that would have been if someone had told me that as a red flag. But it's interesting in learning that about relationships. I've also seen it as an employer and had, staff. When I interview people, I ask them about what the last workplace was like. And depending, because people run patterns all day long, right? In every single area. So if they're constantly saying, oh, at that last place, it was really great, but at the end, they did the wrong thing and they did this to me. And then they're like, and the same pattern they tell about the job place before and before and before. And then when I haven't, paid attention to those things, of course, we have a great relationship until it's time to end. And suddenly I get villainized, even though I'm being fair and reasonable, because that's the pattern that they need to create the cycle that they're used to surviving. And so I think that is such a hot tip, really, because it's also something that's objective. Like it's not something that's running inside the relationship in real time, because in the real time, sometimes it's hard to pick it up, isn't it? But I know for me, EJ, and I don't know if this is common, but the scratches really first came when I was being told something that, and I'm such a growth orientated individual that I take on criticism and feedback almost like a happy puppy. Oh, thank you. That's going to be, yes, that's right. And, yes, I should do that. And then just in reflection, thinking it was like a two-way street, I would go, well, you know how I need to do that? Do you think that's also true for you in this area or this realm? And then suddenly the swing, it's like you said about the mask, it was like everything was good, but then it would be like an entirely different energy and no ability to receive any level of criticism, or to such an extreme level that it would shock me. And then that was kind of the first red flag of like, oh, what just happened? What just happened? Because I wasn't anticipating it. Is that common for narcissists to not be able to receive criticism?
Yeah, absolutely, because it threatens their whole identity.
Right.
And you'll find that they'll tend to put it back onto you.
That happened massively aggressively. And I like what you said too about as a result, then you start to go, again, if you're someone who is, happy to do work on yourself, you're like, oh yeah, okay, maybe, yeah, I need to really look at that. And to the point where though, ultimately, as you said earlier, you really just lose your own rudder. That's what happened for me anyway. And of course, great learnings from that. But I'm wondering, for a woman who is feeling like she has potentially lost her rudder or lost her sense of self. And I'd actually love for you to share your amazing story of self-marriage, because I think that is such a great story. And I'd love to know if that tethers to this. But so many women, even if it's not a narcissistic relationship, even if it's not super abusive, so many of us just lose ourselves inside relationships, whether that's with a partner or in the role of mother, or, and this is for me, the work in the whole womanhood. And for me, waking up as I got older into my wholeness. Like, what do you want to say to the women who maybe don't yet know that a piece of them has been left unactivated or has been shut down or is being given away? Like, I know that you're so committed to helping women in this space. So I suppose, let me get really clear. The question would be, how do we know if we're really loving ourselves or being a loving partner versus giving too much away? Like, where's the line between self-love and selfish and service and submission? Do you know what I mean? Like, where, and what would you say is a good rudder for women? And then maybe the next question would be, what are some tangible steps to move towards self-love?
Yeah, so I think that self-love is also a spectrum. So what I found, and this is really interesting, is that when I actually met the last relationship that was abusive, I was teaching self-love. I was a self-love coach. And I was like, how did this happen to me? And so that's one thing I do want to say is that people out there that are, maybe coaches or successful can often be targets, or empathic can often be targets as well, because you're a high value supply. There's more to higher value, more supply, essentially. And so, and deep, more manipulation can be involved. So I was teaching self-love, but I was teaching what I see as like a surface level self-love. Now the work that I do is very much taking people into the depths of their shame, the depths of their shadows, the stuff that's really icky and yucky. I don't want to look at that. If people see that, I'm going to be abandoned, or I'm going to, on a instinctual level, I'm going to die. They can't see that I'm imperfect, or I'm messy, or I'm lazy, or actually really am selfish, or whatever it's that. Or maybe I've narcissistic traits that I haven't owned, and I actually part of my journey is to own these parts of myself. And so what I discovered is that it's going into those deeper places where the real self-love is. So it's not the outside things that we're necessarily doing. That's what I would probably say is more on the self-care, like looking after the outside, the self-care, but going deeper into the places where we hold the most guilt and the most shame, the stuff that we don't want to talk about to people about. And so that if people knew that it's about me, I would not be loved, I would not fit in, I would not belong, I wouldn't be wanted, etc. And so to the women that are listening to this, that you'll know when I'm saying this what those places are. And that's if you're in a relationship with someone that is healthy, because it would be dangerous to reveal those parts of yourself to someone who isn't, because that's just could add more fuel, is to lean in to sharing and vulnerability about those things. Sharing, I've been feeling a bit self-conscious about this part of myself, and there's something that I haven't been sharing with you, and leaning into sharing those parts of ourselves with our friends, and maybe thoughts or stories we might have been having that are creating separation, judgments we might be having about someone, and really, say, I've been judging you for this, but I realize this is actually about me because I'm not happy with this in myself. And that's really where you can start to really come back into self, because those are the parts that are stopping you from loving yourself. And when you can be seen in those parts and journey with learning to love those parts, and it can just start with like, okay, I can see that I'm feeling ashamed about this part of myself, and I'm going to learn to love this part of myself. I'm learning to love this part of myself. It's okay that I have these thoughts. And then sharing can be really powerful. This is why it's good to work with coaches or go to women's circles or events, etc. Is where they create safe spaces to share those parts of ourselves as a start. That's when the liberation and the freedom can come. And then I think it's about being able to feel free to fully express ourselves, no matter what.
Okay, so that was so beautiful, what you shared, and I agree so much with everything you shared. Also, the work is in releasing the shame and opening and reclaiming and re-expressing those parts of ourselves, because our disowning of it is why we feel not fully accepted by others, but it's a mirror of our not acceptance of self. But what I love by what you said there is, perhaps for someone in an unhealthy relationship, feeling like it would be not okay to express that. So always feeling like you're having to keep something would be a good, measure potentially of, is this relationship one that really supports my wholeness, as I would say it, or supports me being fully expressed, as you were saying, which is beautiful. So that is interesting. And then I like also what you're saying, that there are steps to moving towards that. So maybe it's sharing it with someone that you do feel safe with, and then sharing it from there, maybe with a coach, or getting support around it. Because one thing I know from my own shame work and the work I do with my clients is that the more you share the thing that you think is most shameful, the completely less, it has any power, right? It's like the boogie monster. If we keep opening the cupboard door enough, we start to realize that wasn't even a thing, and when you're able to share it with kind of anyone without any emotional trigger, then I think it's safe to say that it's been released. But starting small, would you suggest? Because there have been times in my life where I have fought to share something, and then literally, but actually I should share the story because it's relevant here to your journey too. I shared a deep shame post my divorce. I developed an eating disorder, which, I love that you were talking about. And that was a way of meeting multiple needs, to be honest: comfort, control, and freedom, and powerlessness, which I needed, to reaffirm and equally fight it for. So I developed bulimia. And for me, that was heavily incongruent with who I was as a nutritional educator and, a self-love and physical wellness expert. Anyway, and that persisted for a number of years in my life. And then sharing it with my partner at the time was unbelievably hard for me. But I felt I needed to do that to reach a deeper connection, because it was really, I'm not a secret keeper, but that was my big secret, and I felt such shame. It was so heavy. And I remember taking about 20 minutes of crying to try to tell him, and he was like, "You can tell me." I'm like, "I can't tell you. It's so bad." And eventually told him. And you would think the story would then go that he would say, "Well, that's okay. I love you anyway," or whatever. But no, what happened is he just said, you've, what's the word? Entrapped me. If I had known that you're not aligned, you're not congruent, like everything that I'd been saying to myself got said to me. And I remember being like, "Oh my God, this is terrible. I'm the worst person ever." And here's the fast track to the point. It took about 2 days of me going, "I'm a really bad person." And also at the same time being a little angry because why didn't he love me? But at the same time, he was just like, "It's really wrong what you've done." And he had his anger, and he really, really dialed it up to the point where he then told someone else and was using their justification that he was right in his experience. And I'm like, "I haven't told a single soul, and I just told you, and now you just told them. Like, what's going on?" Anyway, my point being that about a day later, I remember sitting in meditation, and this rise of self-defense and reminding that I had an ineffective coping mechanism, but I'm not my ineffective coping mechanism. You know what I mean? Like, it was a sense of, I'm not my bulimia. And if he wants to make me that's on him. But the only way I can really relate that is like when you have a sibling and you pick on your sibling, but when someone else picks on your sibling, you step forward and you're like, "Hey, back off, mister. That's my sister or my brother." And so the blessing in me sharing that secret and having it go so badly was it really forced this internal stand for myself, because I'd been beating myself up, and it really was the most massive awakening of the freedom I needed to then find to be a stand for myself. But I've also done a lot of growth work, right? So I was capable of moving through that and ultimately having, the ascension I needed. And when you said before, like finding other people, what would be your advice to someone who's like, "Okay, maybe I should share my secret because EJ said I should share it. And what if what I had happened to them, for instance?" And I'm just wondering, like, what would be your advice to know whether that person can be a safe space or not? Like, is there any advice around that?
Yeah, well, one of the things I look at is how self-aware is the other person, and are they willing to be responsible for their own feelings and emotions about whatever you share with them. So have the capability of, are they someone that's really a bit judgmental, has their own opinions about things, then maybe that's not going to be the right person to share with. Mm-hmm. And thinking about if maybe there's no one in your life, then it might be looking at going to some kind of meetup group or circle. There's lots of different ones around that are supportive. And I too had a eating disorder, and I didn't go to a meetup group. I ended up telling my mom, and she was actually amazing about it. Mm-hmm. And one, as you probably know about eating disorders, is the shame cycle, because it's the shame it's the shame about lying about it that's creating more of the doing of it by that vicious cycle. So the first piece is like sharing it, and you had an knowing that to hold yourself in that. And so that's why support groups and things are so important, because there's other people that can be like, it's okay, you're not alone. And I honestly, and like I'm sure you resonate, I thought I was the only one. Like I was like, I'm the only one that's like doing this stuff.
Yeah, we do. We think we're alone. And I think we also look at other people and think everyone's got their life together. And certainly, you know, at that time in my life, people were just, and that was one of the things that kept triggering me needing to share it, is that I had girlfriends that were like, Marina, you're amazing. I can't believe you're dealing with all of these things and you just deal with it so well. And on the outside, I was dealing with it really well. I was putting out fires and being unbelievably miscapable. And on the inside, I was then beating myself up for this really unhealthy and yet at the time super necessary crutch, which when I worked through, I realized why I had it, and I realized I'm not a bad person. And one thing I like to say is that we do what we know, or we do what we need, but we're not what we do. Because I think that sometimes we really do. Shame comes from thinking we're a bad person because we did a quote unquote bad thing. But nothing we do, if we really break it down, is actually not done from a space of love. Like even negative health issues, right? Like part of me was just trying to provide myself what I couldn't get in the world at that time, to my way of thinking in another way, which of course I could, but it was just giving it to me in the way it saw it. So you've touched on a couple of times about your partner being self-responsible. You've touched on boundaries. And, you know, I know for myself, that's really where the self-love piece becomes an actionable in life. It comes down to, am I upholding the boundaries for my sovereign soul and making sure that, yes, I can still be of service to other people, but where and how am I meeting my own needs and prioritizing my own desires and need for different things? Can you speak to us about how boundaries play out and whether you think that's an important ingredient inside of this, like how does that work in relationships, for healthy relationships? How critical is a healthy boundary and how do we go about establishing them?
Extremely critical. Yeah, so thank you. It's a great question. So boundaries essentially help us to live inside of our values. And that's the key to us living a happy life. And so, and we have to be careful not to be under-boundaried and not to be over-boundaried, which is actually a constant discovery. And a lot of people in relationships don't even have conversations about boundaries, don't have agreements, just go day to day. And how this usually starts off is at the start of a relationship, when the happy chemicals that are bonding them together are really high. Often people want to spend as much time together as possible. They just want to see that person all the time, want to talk to them all the time. And they start to let go of some of the things that are making meet their values. They start to like, oh, I'm not going to go to that yoga class today, or I'm going to put off hanging out with my friends to go hang out with my partner. And so there's these little bits and pieces that over time, what happens is that each person in the relationship, their outside values start to fall away, and they start to get more consumed in the relationship, and they start to lose themselves, lose their identity, especially if they have roles playing out, like it might be a rescuer or a people pleaser or a martyr or a caretaker, or an overachiever. There's a lot of different roles that are playing out. And when someone comes in, what I call the role mate, is they play out this role mate relating. And this is where boundaries are really important, because it's not just about saying no to that person. It's also being really conscious of where we're still spending our own time, and also like checking in with ourselves and what our truth and our soul actually wants, rather than maybe the happy chemicals or the, oh, I need to do this because my role says that I need to help them with this thing and I need to meet their needs, because when I do that, then I'm going to get love from them, and if I don't do that, they're going to be upset with me. And that's where the boundaries get really messy. And when that just goes on top consistently, that's where we lose ourselves. So And a lot of my experience and a lot of what I've seen in my clients is that often people will be under-boundaried and then they'll lose themselves, and then they'll be like, right, I'm never experiencing this again. And they become really over-boundaried and they actually don't let people in. They're like, oh, start to become less available. They'll be too busy. They won't make time. I work with a lot of women who are high achievers and are very career orientated and unconsciously avoiding intimacy or the consequences of intimacy, which might mean they don't want to lose themselves again. So they just say, oh, I'll just keep myself busy and don't want to have that to happen again.
Or they don't want to lose the control of what they think keeps them safe, right? All of the pieces of the moving parts of their life. Yes, I can relate through my own journey, and also the clients I work with too. I think our tribes are very similar. So I know that my tribe is going to be loving what we're talking about today. Now, when you mentioned before about finding the role mate and the person who then, matches it, and boundaries, and what I have noticed in myself is I know a boundary of mine, even if it's not actually there, is in violation, is because I'm in that internal conflict, which might then be frustration, or I might act in ways that aren't how I want to be acting. Either I'm resentful or I'm angry or whatever it is. And I've realized it's because, for instance, I might have the belief, I'm just taking it for instance with my children, because we need boundaries in all relationships, right? That I was raised by a Russian fetus. So for me, yes is love and no is not love, like eat more. And so when my children would ask me for food, there was that part of me that's like, yes, of course you can have it. Like I didn't want them to feel not able to have things. And that might even pertain to less healthy things. And then just realizing that actually saying yes to them felt good from the perspective of, I'm giving my children, this is a giving thing. And then at the same time, I felt really shit as a mum, because I'm like, you know better about nutrition. You should be saying that's too much of that. And yet a part of me didn't want to say no. And yet I realized that no was actually the act of love. So before, when you said it's not just about saying no to someone, sometimes when we're saying no to something, that's equally saying yes to our values. And I have found myself that when I'm in discord around a boundary that's maybe too loose, or the fence has fallen over, or I never even built it, it's often because I might be honoring certain beliefs or, codes of codependency of some description, but also it's because I'm saying no to one of my values. And when we say yes to our values, even if it's tricky because it involves conflict, or even if it's tricky because it brushes up against those other things, ultimately it will feel good, because I loved what you said, that boundaries is living in alignment with your values. So would you say that that's a good, I'm just thinking for the person who's listening, who's wondering, well, I feel like I've got good boundaries. I know what I like, I know what I don't like, but that maybe a good way for them to move forward this week would be just to assess where they're potentially frustrated. Like what's a sign that a boundary is being violated, or there's no boundary in place?
Yeah, what you shared before is just feeling like resentment, upset, like energetically in your body, it feels like, ugh, I don't want to do that thing, but I have to do it.
Yes.
Yeah.
And actually, I had an interesting thing this morning happen where I had exactly that happen. So I came down and something happened in my house and I had to go to work, but the thing gave me an instant, I could feel, we're in the work and I knew the trigger. I was like, I am triggered. I was kind of angry. And so I won't unpack that story, but what I wanted to say is, would you agree that when a boundary is violated, it's not that they did something wrong, it's an opportunity for us to go, what in me is not in alignment with what I'm seeing. And so, for instance, in this particular scenario, the person wasn't being a bad person or doing anything naughty. It actually was pushing on a trigger for me around stuff I'm working through for myself. And that's often what boundaries give us the opportunity to do, right? It isn't about keeping people out or making people wrong or right. It's actually about figuring out for ourselves where the line is in living with alignment, like you said, with values, but also kind of expanding ourselves into the parts of ourselves that maybe we haven't been with. And there will sometimes be friction in that journey. Have you found that to be true in your life? Like as you establish boundaries or create new ways of being, that your body and your mind and everything sometimes is very heavily resistant to that?
Yeah, absolutely. Because The boundaries, like sometimes people think boundaries is about I'm going to disconnect or I'm going to create conflict. But actually, boundaries are going to create more intimacy and more connection because it's going to create safety. Yeah, and along the way, yes, I've had to let people go who didn't know how to honor my boundaries or didn't know how to speak their own boundaries, and that led to resentment, and I had to work through all of that. And so I feel like it helps you have a more home for your soul. Like it's almost, when I think about it, these are like there's a home, a nice safe home for your soul to live in, right? And then the identity that we think that we've grown up with, as identity, this is who I am, doesn't usually have boundaries or won't like boundaries because it's so strong. It's like, no, I don't want to play with those. It's like it can see boundaries as constricting. Whereas the soul, this is going to create this safe home, and I'm going to be time and energy on things that my identity wants to do when actually, my soul needs these other things or these other connections.
I love that phrase that you said. It creates a safe home for our soul. That just is like hit me right in the soul. And I agree. And I think too, for me, the journey to having healthy boundaries as a recovering people pleaser and / control junkie has been that in establishing boundaries for me has buoyed me with a deep degree of self-trust. And then that allows me to navigate the world and people and their wants, desires, and opinions with even more freedom. So it's that sense of safety, but also freedom, because I kind of know that I'm not always going to get everything right, and I'm not always doing the right thing, but I'll be with myself through the journeying of the acknowledging that it was wrong without judgment, and I'll be a stand for myself. And I really feel if everybody did that, we don't have to, people pleasing would just be dead and in the dust, right? And we'd just come from a place of, love, acceptance, lack of judgment, and just see each other in our completeness and meet each other there. So I think what you said about deeper connections is true. And yet we do have that perception, don't we, that if I put up boundaries, they won't like it, they'll leave. If I put up boundaries, I'm separating myself from another, but you're really just letting them know how you most like to play, which leads to greater pleasure too, right? So you said earlier, you touched on pleasure. Can you speak to pleasure and how it plays into becoming the one and then taking that into relationships? Like what does this piece of pleasure mean to you?
So yeah, if I speak to my journey, I so resonate to the controller, and for me, pleasure is definitely found in the taking the pressure off the need to do all the time and the shoulds. And what I found is it's in the surrender. It's in the surrender. It's in the not necessarily having to doing something for a purpose, that it has to achieve something, and being present in the moment, just being present in that moment. And also it's being willing to meet the pain, because we can't, pain and pleasure, it's like two things that happen together. Like you can't really feel the pleasure if you're not willing to go through the pain. So even going through all those past relationships that were really, really painful, I cracked my heart open, like broke me love, like my own love. And so like I'm incredibly grateful that I've got to experience that depth, and now that I get to share it with others, and that's where the pleasure can be. And same with intimacy and sexuality, like there's shame and guilt and numbness, and that can be experienced in our bodies. And underneath all that, when we're willing to work through that and feel that, express that, is the pleasure. And then then can we find the pleasure in the pain? And like even when I get triggered sometimes and I'm like a mess and I'm crying and I'm pissed off, I'm like, there's a part of me that's happy, because I'm like, oh, I'm healing some part of me that is wanting to be loved here. That's wanting to be seen and wanting to be loved. And this trigger is just showing me a veil of past pain that's wanting to be loved. And I get the opportunity. So thank you for that opportunity, because I know that's going to help me love myself more.
Yes, 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 yes to all of that. And yes to the surrender. And so I know that we've been through those journeys ourselves and therefore are massive advocates for it. But I want to just ask you, what would you say to the listener? Because I know there are many of them listening who are really caught in the doing of the do, who are attached to achievement, who are attached to productivity, who literally, they can hear us talk about, oh, we need to surrender and open, and then we get to have intimacy and pleasure and all and they're just like, yeah, and right, when am I going to fit that into my life? And I got kids to take care of, I got a house to keep clean, I got a job to do, and all of those things are really, really true for them in their lives. And so when you're that caught on the rat wheel, and you don't get what I would say is the blessing of the like literal breakdown, which sometimes cracks that thing wide open. But let's say you're in the doing and you seem like you've got kind of like all the plates at least going, and you might feel the pressure of it and you might feel a little bit trapped in it, but you also know that by society's measure, on many levels, you're crushing it. What would you say to that woman who's like, things are fine here, thanks very much, move on with your pleasure talk, move on with your surrender talk? Where do they even start, and how do they get off that rat wheel? What would be your advice to them?
To get out of the head and into the body.
Mm-hmm. And what would be one tip for that?
Yeah. Dance, movement,
yeah,
the body. And this is a constant journey. I've been doing embodiment for a long time, and I'm still very much heady. So I would just say, don't be too hard on yourself. If you're like, oh, but I'm always in my head and overthinking, and I so get it. And I just, it's a big part of my journey, and still is. And it is, even if you can just put on one song a day,
yeah,
and give yourself the space to move your body and bring in breath, bring in sound, bring in some kind of touch and move and shake out the body, just let it out, because the body is the home of the soul, and the soul is trying to speak, but when the head is so loud, you can't hear it. And what I went through was on this train from where my head thought I was going and trying to reach this level of success, and my soul was like, I just want deep intimacy and I want deep connection. And what happened is when I started journeying with getting out of the need to achieve and to be enough and to feel valuable enough in this world, and I started to go into feeling more and expressing more, then the joy and what I was trying to get to by achieving was already there. And then happened, and I use this statement a lot, the more intimacy I have, the more impact I make. So I started to reframe myself that play and intimacy really serve my purpose and fuel my. So the more play and intimacy I have, the more that I just show up. And I find energetically what happens when I'm in my juiciness and my aliveness and I'm having all this intimacy and pleasure, people just come and they're like, I don't know what you're doing, but I want some of it. I want to work with you.
It's a magnetism, which is the feminine essence, right? That's the feminine energy versus that masculine energy, So opening and inviting it in. And that was a big aha for me, that sometimes doing less, but in intending and inviting more actually rendered better results. So my advice, I suppose, for the really, mind heavy, and that's me too, at times that's where I go to for sure, is, just speaking to that mind aspect of you, I would say, what have you got to lose? Why don't you try it? And if it doesn't deliver a result, you can go back to where you are, because at least we can use your logic to give us at least a shot at opening into surrender, and do those things that you think are a bit crazy and a bit woo-woo and a bit like lose control, look a little silly, but maybe a part of you might really enjoy them. So I love that. I could talk forever about this topic with you, because I can see so many parallels in our journeys. But I'm going to ask you a couple of really quick fire questions as we wrap up today, because I know your time is valuable and I appreciate the time you've given me today. Firstly, for yourself, what are you currently working on in your life? Like, what's really alive for you that you're enjoying unfolding, unpacking, and kind of maybe even having some resistance or friction with?
Intimacy with women at the moment in terms of relationships and friendships. We wrote about this morning when I woke up, and it's about really connecting outside of purpose, outside of business, and having those really heartfelt connections, realizing that I'm, often keeping myself busy, and all the connections I have are always business or purpose related. And actually that I'm really desiring more connection, more touch, more laughter, more play, and more closeness with my friends. And I did a lot of healing around intimacy with men, and I'm like, okay, so now we're going to look at women.
Yeah, I love that. And, for someone who, because I teach 3 archetypes in the whole womanhood, and the gypsy for me is the play, and that's the sisterhood. That's that calling of the feminine energy to be like in communication and collaboration with girls, because it's a different vibe, isn't it? Yeah, that's beautiful, EJ. I'm so excited for you because I know how powerfully when you choose to expand into something where that's going to go, I'm excited to see. What about if you were to recommend people one book or an experience, so it could be a workshop or a thing you did, whether it was breath work or sitting in stillness, like what was the thing in your life, be it a book or a movie or an experience, anything that pops to mind as being really quite transformative in a like a leap forward kind of way? What was something that really cracked you open or gave you the first crumb that really led to the rest?
There's so many.
You can give a couple. You know me, I'm not going to limit you, so this is good. If you've got a couple, that's fine. Rattle them off. We'll put them in the show notes if there are any things, or we'll just list them out if they're experiences.
Yeah, so one of my most favorite authors and teachers is Alison Armstrong. The book The Queen's Code, which is about women understanding men. So that was massive in terms of understanding why men are the way they are, and actually supported me in working with men. I worked with men for a long time, and yeah, that was just like, seeing men in a whole new light. That was like a massive, like, not mask, like a veil was lifted, and I could suddenly see men in a like, they're not all assholes. Like, oh, they're so beautiful. Oh, wow, men are amazing. So I really love men, and so that was one of the things. And another one would have been, I did the Conscious Uncoupling course by Catherine Woolward Thomas, and that was really powerful, and I did it on my own. So this has been a big, I guess, contributor to my book, because that's the course that I did, and that was just really powerful to see the patterns and things. But that's been an ever evolving journey as well. So yeah, so that were 2 that have had definitely a profound effect on me, for sure.
Beautiful. And I just realized that earlier in the interview, I asked you about your self-marriage, and then we didn't really unpack that. But you can tell us a little bit about where that concept came from, because I know you got a lot of media attention, and that was like a really big thing for people to hear about. And I know it really opened up a massive conversation. So I think that's amazing. Can you tell us a bit about that? But I have a funny question to ask you. With your partner now, if you chose to get married, A, would you choose? And B, do you need to divorce yourself to get married, or is it something you can do simultaneously?
Totally simultaneously.
Tell us about the self-marriage though. Tell us nice and quick about that, because it was very ballsy of you, and I really admire it.
Yeah, so how it happened is I was actually working with a client, regional healer, and she was going through a breakup, and I had this idea come to me to do a self-marriage ceremony. We were both in Bali at the time, and I said to her, let's do this while you're here. And it was just such a beautiful journey, and we did it, and it was amazing, because when I did the ceremony for her, so I did this before I did it for myself, I was like, oh, this is more than just for you. This is going to be quite big. Like, we could feel it. We both had goosebumps. And then I decided to do the self-marriage ceremony for myself 2 months later. And so that was in February 14th, 2017. And I did the ceremony on the beach on the Gold Coast, and had no intention that it would end up going viral, but we did end up recording it. And what happened is a friend of mine sent me something about sologamy that she found. She said, I think you should apply. And I was like, okay, I'll apply. And it happened to be Studio 10, the TV show. And I ended up flying to Sydney to be on the show and talk about sologamy and self-marriage. And then from there, it ended up going viral, and they got the recording viral. It was all over the internet, and it was a pretty crazy time. And a lot of people, it was hilarious because people were like, people did not understand it. They thought it was crazy. They thought I was a narcissist, which I thought was. I was like, narcissists need people to by themselves. And it wasn't me to say I'm never going to be with someone, or I'm not going to, like, other people use the word sologamy. I didn't actually use that word because a lot of sologamy is about I'm choosing to be by myself. I was like, no, I'm totally open to being in a relationship again. But this time I'm doing it from a place of wholeness, not a place of like, I need your love.
Yes.
And one of the most beautiful things that I have, the gift that I have to give being in partnership, is like, I am here from the fullness of my own love. I don't need you to love me because I love myself. And then our love gets to be shared, rather than I'm trying to get you to love me because I don't love myself and he needs my love. No, it's like we both love ourselves. When we come together, we get to share in that love from our overflow.
Yes, that's so beautiful. Okay, well, I wanted to just unpack that story because it was awesome, and I thought it was awesome. Okay, so quick fire answers. What would be your number one tip for enhancing energy?
Dance.
Done.
Yeah.
What would be your number one tip for enhancing the sense or the feeling of empowerment, feeling internally activated?
I was going to say dance.
Dance again, just dance. Love it. And then what about for enhancing your expression in the world? Like maybe this is your purpose, maybe this is your mission, like coming out into the world. What's a way that we can enhance our expression so that we feel more fully expressed?
Try not to say dance. So I would say is that vulnerability, and start with it saying that one person, like they might be saying that one person might be putting up a little post on Facebook or doing a little story and edging those pieces.
Yeah, so owning your shame and owning your shadows to be fully expressed. I love that. Yes, I just got chills. And then if we were going to wrap up and say no one heard any other part of this podcast, they missed the whole thing, or we could put a little message in a bottle or a little thing that we could press play, and the only bit they would hear is this next sentence. What is the one little soundbite message that you, through all of your learnings, which are so deep and varied, but what would be the one thing that you would be like, hey guys, just remember this is important, this?
Yeah, essentially it's remembering that we are love, and then everything else is just conditioning.
Oh, yeah. Mic drop. Absolute mic drop, EJ. Yes, we are love and everything else is conditioning. Boom. I'm going to quote that. That is absolute pure gold. Gosh, I don't think I've ever had anyone, in my opinion, nail that quite so well. That's insane. Thank you. Whew. That was perfect. All right. Well, unless there is anything else that you would like to share specifically, we're going to link to everything that you do and who you be in the world. And from me and all of the women, I definitely speak on behalf of them when I say thank you for the work you do in the world. And thank you for the way that you so openly share. That is something that you are, I think, a leader and a warrior in showing women how to own their wholeness. And that to me is a gift beyond measure. So thank you. And thank you for your time today. Was there anything you wanted to leave our listeners with?
Yeah, I thought I'd show you the book. It's really pretty. Obviously you can't see it, but it's Become the One. It's on Amazon, and people can get it on ebook or they can get it paperback.
And we're going to link also to your Instagram. And I noticed on Instagram that international buyers can buy from Amazon and Australian buyers can buy from a different link too. So all of that will be linkable. But guys, as you can see, that is a read worth making the time to absorb all of this wisdom and all of these experiences in. So highly, highly recommend the book and working with EJ in the future if you feel called to addressing some of the things we've talked about today. On that note, thank you, and thank you. Thank you. Just deeply grateful. Thank you, beautiful.
My pleasure. Thank you.